Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a case that still divides courtrooms, haunts investigators, and forces an uncomfortable question no system wants to answer. What happens when the justice system chooses speed over truth and never looks back? The rain fell in sheets the night it happened, washing the streets in flickering red and blue as patrol cars slammed to a halt behind a shuttered diner. An alley that usually smelled of grease and garbage became a crime scene sealed with yellow tape. A woman lay motionless on the cold concrete, her body positioned as if she had tried to crawl away. One shoe was missing. Her purse was overturned, its contents scattered like evidence no one would ever fully piece together. By sunrise, the city was panicking. Local news stations looped blurry images of the alley, warning residents to stay indoors. Politicians demanded swift action. The police department felt the pressure tightening like a noose. This wasn't just a murder, it was a test. And failure wasn't an option. 48 hours later, detectives announced they had their man. Daniel Mercer was arrested quietly, without sirens or spectacle. He didn't resist. He didn't even ask why at first. Daniel was 32, soft-spoken, and invisible in the way only working-class men can be. He stocked shelves at night, paid rent late, and had no criminal history. He also had no one powerful enough to protect him when the system decided it needed a suspect. A witness claimed to have seen someone matching Daniel's build near the diner. A partial fingerprint, smudged and incomplete, was labeled a probable match. Surveillance cameras nearby had mysteriously failed that night. None of it was solid. But together, it formed a story investigators could sell. Inside the interrogation room, the air was stale and the lights never dimmed. Hours blurred together as detectives repeated the same questions, rephrased the same accusations, and dismissed every denial. Daniel asked for a lawyer. The request was noted but ignored. He was told the evidence was overwhelming. He was told this would be easier if he cooperated. He was told things would only get worse. When the confession finally came, it sounded wrong. The details were vague. The timeline didn't fit. But it existed on tape, and that was all anyone wanted. By the end of the week, the headlines changed. The city exhaled. What never made the news was another name. Early in the investigation, a different man had been questioned. His car had been spotted near the diner. He had a documented history of violence, including prior assaults that never led to convictions. He claimed he was just passing through. No one pressed him. His file was thin, his interview short. Once Daniel's confession was secured, that file was quietly shelved, misplaced in a cabinet where inconvenient truths tend to die. At trial, the courtroom felt less like a search for justice and more like a performance. The prosecution presented a clean narrative, free of contradictions. The defense struggled with limited resources and evidence that seemed to evaporate before it could be examined. The jury was shown the confession, played on a loop until it sounded convincing through repetition alone. Daniel was convicted in under 4 hours. Death row stripped time of meaning. Years passed measured only by appeals denied and letters unanswered. Daniel wrote relentlessly, insisting he was innocent. He named the man investigators had ignored. He begged for DNA testing, for witnesses to be re-interviewed, for files to be reopened. Occasionally, a journalist would listen. Occasionally, an expert would raise doubts. But the courts had a different priority: finality. Then, buried deep in an old evidence box, someone found a report that was never disclosed to the defense, one that pointed directly to the man who had walked away on day one. And once it surfaced, everything started to unravel. If this case is already making you uncomfortable, hit like right now, because the truth only spreads when people push it forward. And if you believe justice should never be rushed, subscribe and stay with this story until the end. By the 10th year on death row, Daniel Mercer had become a ghost the system barely remembered. His appeals were denied with stamped signatures and recycled language. Procedurally barred. Insufficient grounds. Words that sounded official enough to bury a man alive. But outside those concrete walls, cracks were starting to form. It began with a retired forensic analyst who stumbled across the case while teaching a criminal justice seminar. The fingerprint evidence bothered him. It always had. The print used to convict Daniel was partial, degraded, and never conclusively matched. More troubling was what wasn't tested at all: DNA recovered from beneath the victim's fingernails. DNA that had been logged, stored, and forgotten. When the analyst requested access, he was told the evidence had already been resolved. Case closed. No need to reopen old wounds. At the same time, a woman came forward, nervous, shaking, but determined. She had been the witness who originally placed a man like Daniel near the diner. Years earlier, she had privately told detectives she wasn't sure. She had been coached, pressured, reminded how serious it was to get this right. When she tried to correct her statement later, no one returned her calls. Now she was ready to talk. Her new testimony pointed away from Daniel entirely. She described a different man. Older. Aggressive. A man who had argued with the victim inside the diner shortly before closing. A man whose name appeared briefly in early police notes, then vanished. If you're already questioning how this could happen, drop a comment right now. Do you think this was incompetence or something worse? Your answer says a lot. Journalists began digging, and what they found was disturbing. Suppressed reports. Missing interview tapes. An internal memo recommending further investigation into the alternate suspect, dated just one day before Daniel's confession. That memo was never shared with the defense. It never made it to court. The alternate suspect, now living under a different last name, had a trail behind him. Bar fights. Domestic incidents. Restraining orders. After the diner murder, his behavior escalated, but without a conviction, his record stayed clean enough to move freely. He slipped through the cracks not because there was no evidence, but because no one wanted to look. As execution day approached, the urgency became unbearable. Daniel's attorneys filed last-minute motions, armed with expert affidavits and new witness statements. They argued the conviction was unsafe. That executing Daniel would be irreversible. The response from the court was swift and devastating. The evidence, they said, might be interesting, but it came too late. The law valued closure over correction. Opening the door now, they warned, would set a dangerous precedent. A dangerous precedent. For whom? On the final night, Daniel made one last statement. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He named the man again. He asked one question that hung in the room long after the lights went out. If I'm guilty, why are they afraid to test the evidence? If that question hit you, subscribe right now, because Chapter 3 will expose what happened after it was already too late. The execution went forward. But the story didn't end there. Because 3 months later, in a neighboring state, another woman was found behind a closed business. Same positioning. Same missing shoe. Same signature detail investigators once claimed was unique to Daniel Mercer. And this time, the DNA didn't match the man they had killed. Before we dive in, smash that like button if you can't stand injustice, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will shake everything you thought about this case. And comment below, do you think anyone can be truly safe when the system fails? Let's get into it. The discovery of the second victim sent shockwaves through law enforcement and media alike. The DNA test, long delayed, matched the man who had been dismissed at the very start of the investigation, the one Daniel Mercer had named in his letters. The same man who had walked free while Daniel sat in a cell counting down the days of his life. The revelations were horrifying. The real killer had been under everyone's noses, able to live normally while the city celebrated the closure of a crime he actually committed. Investigators scrambled to piece the timeline together. Old police reports were dusted off, interview transcripts re-examined, and digital records dug out of long-forgotten archives. Each piece told the same story. Tunnel vision had blinded the system. Detectives had ignored red flags pointing to the real suspect, choosing the easiest path. Supervisors had rubber-stamped decisions that cut corners. And prosecutors had relied on a confession extracted through exhaustion rather than truth. The public reaction was immediate and angry. Editorials called it a miscarriage of justice. Social media erupted with disbelief, outrage, and questions that had no answers. How could one man die while another lived freely? How often had this happened without anyone noticing? The case became a symbol, A cautionary tale about the cost of procedural shortcuts. If this makes your blood boil, hit that like button again. Let's show that people care about real justice. And subscribe so you don't miss the shocking developments this story uncovers next. Meanwhile, the real killer was finally arrested in a quiet suburb, as if trying to avoid the spotlight he had long manipulated. When questioned, he smiled and shrugged, offering vague denials that crumbled under the weight of forensic evidence. Investigators found his apartment littered with files and notes connecting him to multiple crimes over the years, crimes that might have been prevented if anyone had looked closer the first time. For Daniel Mercer, there was no justice, no retrial, no redemption in the eyes of the law. Only the posthumous acknowledgement that he had been innocent, a truth that came too late to save him. His letters, his desperate appeals, and his insistence on naming the real perpetrator became a haunting record for anyone willing to read them. They were a warning, a reminder that when the system fails, lives are destroyed and the real criminals keep walking free. If you want to honor Daniel's story and make sure the world remembers, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment about what you would have done if you were on that jury, and like the video to spread awareness. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. The case didn't just end with an arrest. It sparked policy changes, renewed calls for DNA testing, and brought attention to the systemic failures that had allowed an innocent man to die. Yet, even as the real killer sat in prison, the question lingered like a shadow over the city. How many more Daniel Mercers were out there, waiting for the system to pick someone convenient instead of the truth? Before you leave, comment your thoughts on how justice could be fixed, like this video if it shook you, and make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories like this waiting to be uncovered, and you won't want to miss the next shocking case we reveal. Justice may have come too late for one man, but for those who watch, remember, truth is relentless, and sometimes it demands that we look closer than anyone else dares.